It's Monday, May 15th. It's 4:05. Jim Fish is here, so we can start. I'll call this meeting of the Fergus Falls City Council to order. Roll call, please.
Here. Here.
Here. Here. Here. Here. And I believe Tom Roofer will be here shortly, from what
5
I
minutes.
understand, and Anthony will be here sometime this evening, but we don't know when he's going to be able to. He's dealing with some things with his wife. So, again, thanks everyone for being here. Just to set the format for this meeting today. This committee of the whole, as we stated prior, is intended to be a session for the council to consider some ideas moving forward with the Regional Treatment Center complex. We don't anticipate that that's going to be the opportunity for the public to speak. It's meant for the council. Depending on what the council decides to do, I do anticipate allowing the public to speak at the city council meeting. And we will go over those ground rules when we get to that portion of the meeting. But this work session is intended for the council, and if there's any questions the council has for anyone outside of this group, then those questions can be addressed. But just to get started, we called this meeting. I think many of you read the article that was in the paper, and I'm not going to go over that in detail. I just want to make a couple points, and then I want the council to have a discussion about how we move forward. I think the number one thing for me to understand as a council is that we do move forward on this property, on this project. I think the council has done that in the past, has made more progress in the last 2 years, and gotten more things done on that campus than we have in 12 years. But I think we need to continue going forward. I believe, as we've said, we have one option: to go to the state legislature with a plan and carry that plan forward. Council has identified coming to a resolution on that property as the number one priority for the city multiple times, and I think we need to formulate that plan of how that comes to reality. My reason for writing that letter, and my reason for calling this meeting, happened at the committee of the whole meeting at the police department when we had the Friends of the Kirkbride and the Kirkbride Advisory Committee present, and it became very obvious to me at that meeting that we have several trains on a collision course, and we need to address those. On the one hand, we have the historic tax credits and the National Registry. On the other hand, we have the city's need to have a manageable project that we can actually get our hands around, that we can actually complete. We have a developer that has a project that does not recognize all of the main Kirkbride complex, and we have a plan B that we have openly discussed demolition. I've heard a lot of people tell me what we can and can't do based on what SHPO will or will not allow us to do on that campus, but I never heard SHPO actually say those words. So I took it upon myself to go to SHPO, meet with them directly, and ask them directly if we have a plan that does not have full use of the entire Kirkbride Horseshoe Complex, does that automatically mean we are off the registry? And the answer I got was never say never. They said it would not be easy, but it would be a possibility. We would have to go through a process that would involve a historic architectural consultant and tell them what our plan is, why we think it's justified, what parts are we trying to save, what does it look like, how much does it cost, and then the National Park Service is the one that would actually determine whether or not that property could maintain this National Registry status under that scenario. Just as you put together a plan to get a property on the National Registry, you also put a plan together in order to make modifications to the property. And the final thing I'm going to say before I want to open it up to discussion on the council is we can come up with whatever plan we want as a council, but if we don't have the money to do it, to implement that plan, we might as well not have a plan. And if we go to St. Paul asking for money to do something up there. And as soon as we walk out of that office of that legislator that we're talking to, and we have 3 people walking in behind us telling them, don't give them the money, because we're not going to get the money. That's my greatest fear, is we can come up with any plan we want, but we don't get people together. So I think that is a way forward that recognizes which portions of that building are historic, which ones, what we can actually accomplish as a council. And I think there's a path forward that we can present that plan to the National Park Service and move forward. And then we don't ask, in my opinion, we don't ask permission of SHPO of what we can do. We tell them this as a community is what we can do. We go through the right process and we see where we're at that point. So my main goal for this meeting is the council to come up with a plan of how to move forward, not necessarily coming up with what is the exact plan. I have my ideas of what I would like to see up there, but there's 8 members on the council who also have theirs, and I think we can work through that. But I think there is a plan, a path going forward that brings people together. Yes, there's 5% on this side and there's 5% on this side. They're never going to agree on anything. But I truly believe in this situation, in this circumstance, we have 90% that can agree that we can come up with a plan and move forward with it. And I think it's our best and only chance of actually getting funded. So that's my, supposed to be 1 minute spiel, one a little longer. This is the only item on the agenda, guys. This might be an awful short meeting. Just kidding. Rod, did you have a question?
This is on our table. It's from the developer, which would affect our discussion a little bit, I think.
Absolutely. There is a letter from the developer. We spoke with him this morning. And maybe Kent wants to address this, maybe the council has questions, and this is a public document, by the way, but basically, it just acknowledges the fact of that the uncertainties surrounding that building and the historic registry make it difficult for him to go through with his project until the city makes their plan and finds out whether or not that building is able to remain on the historic registry. Is that sum that letter up? I'm not reading it right now. Kent, do you want to?
Sure. So maybe just a little bit of background regarding the developer process. Since the letter of intent was entered into, there have been a lot of meetings with Mark Christofferson as the lead developer. A lot of staff time and resources have been put into trying to arm the developer with information as they start to move forward with their project. Reaffirmed the expected deliverables by the May deadline, and as the time went by and as they did what they were doing on their end, it kept on narrowing back down to this core question of what they can do or what they're willing to do is going to be defined by issues relating to A, the legislation, and B, the national registration of the campus. And it kept on coming back to the point of whatever they do is going to be driven by those 2 outcomes, because that's going to define what impediments or barriers they might have, because they have already indicated that they aren't interested in using historic tax credits as a financing tool, so it's not a benefit to them, so it can be more of a barrier. And then on the legislative side of it, what they might ask of the city to do in support of their project is going to be defined by what type of money the city can get through a legislative initiative. So because those issues aren't going to be resolved by the May 22nd deadline, and because these discussions started, wanted to have an idea from the developer what their feelings were regarding the dialogue tonight, and also what the city might do to define its path forward. And the developer is comfortable with the city taking the lead to develop a plan for the campus, or the campus plan, that will identify what to ask for ultimately from the legislature and what to ultimately to present to the stakeholders that have some input on dealing with properties that are on the National Register. The developer remains interested in making something happen and would like to remain at the table to try to dovetail their development into whatever the city's campus plan might be. But they would recognize that their project can't necessarily define the other two outcomes. So they're willing to continue to partner with the city, but have identified that the city should take the lead in developing that campus plan. And they would like the ability to, I can't remember the words that they were going to use, they would like the opportunity to align their future development proposal with what the city determines to be for the overall campus plan. And because we have this letter of intent in place, and we didn't want to step on the developer's toes, Mark Christopherson wrote this to the council, which basically they recognize the dialogue's going to happen, and they welcome the opportunity to remain at the table as a development partner, but following the lead of what the city would define as the campus plan. So all of this would culminate with a presentation or a plan of action at the June 5th session, which would align with what the original timeline was with the developers to come up with a proposed development agreement by June 5th. So they remain at the table, they remain willing to work, but they recognize that they can't be the tip of the spear, so to speak, because of primarily the uncertainties on the legislative outcome as well as the National Register issues. And they also recognize that the amount of resources that they would have to pour into getting the National Registry without the city having a defined plan might be money better spent at a later date when things are more definite, more certain. So I guess the short of it is, developer is fine with you having this dialogue, fine with developing a campus plan, and that could involve them at some stage. It might not involve them depending on how it shakes out, but they're willing to kind of step aside and let the city take the lead.
And I think, Ken, just to add to that, in my opinion, it's important that as we've come up with our plan, whatever that is, we've always talked about Plan A and Plan B, or Track A and Track B. I think we come up with Track 1, and that's the campus development plan. That is, this is the outcome that fits this city that we believe that we can get done, and any development can fit within that plan rather than the other way around. I think for 12 years we've let the tail wag the dog in the sense that we have a developer and we're just trying to fit everything around what that development. No, we need to come up with a plan that fits our city that we can get done, and then any developer that comes to the table can fit within our plan. Because I believe if we get this done, and we save the historic buildings up there, but we recognize that we're not going to be able to save that entire footprint, we're going to be able to develop those buildings. There's no doubt in my mind.
The one question I got when you're looking at the original Track A and Track B is, Track A, we go with the developer, and if he doesn't use the historical tax credits, what are the liabilities for us if we lose these tax credits to the people who are already developing these other properties on the campus? And in Track B, if we go in that direction also, we're looking at the same possibility. We go in there, we're going to demo this building, no matter how much we take down, we're still going to lose the historic tax credits. And then we're still, what is the legal obligation we have to the properties that have already been sold, you know, for them to be able to come back after the city saying, okay, because of what you did, we lost our tax credits and we're not able to develop these properties. Either way we go, Track A or Track B, or even if we go in the other direction, isn't it almost, unless somebody develops the whole thing, aren't we liable no matter which direction we go?
That's a question for lawyers, and I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
But I will just say there's $1.7 million in tax credits over the next 5 years that have already been claimed. And there's also, who knows how many buildings up there could get developed if we can remain those. I think there's a path forward that we can get there. Brent? Scott?
When we sold the property, there was no tax credits involved in it. You weren't going to do the tax credits. There was no mention to that to us. And then now that just came in later in the last year. You applied for the tax credits, or? That's what I understand.
Question for me?
No, I'm just want to say yes or no. Is that you, when you sold the,
No, when they sold it, the tax credits were provided as one of the benefits
Right.
along with the tax, property tax abatement
Right, yep.
incentive.
Yeah.
Those two incentives were, but we had to comply with, doing the buildings historically and passing SHPO and Park Services approval, which we did, on the first two buildings. And we've got those completed and approved. And then we have 3 more buildings to go, and we're a little worried about what will happen with the next 3 buildings, or what will happen to the first 2 if something changes, historically.
I'll ask Andrew to follow
Yeah,
up on it.
Your Honor, members of the council, in reviewing of the development agreement on the red brick buildings, there is no mention of historic tax credits within the development agreement. So to say that that was on the table at the time, I think would be inaccurate, because there would be something in writing to that effect. It is correct that there was a tax exemption that was provided with the property, which has been started on 2 of the buildings that have been developed up there.
That's in separate emails and other things from the city that I still have, and I'll find them for you. So.
But I think we can, quite honestly, I think we can avoid that conversation right now, because I think there's a path forward that works within the system, that puts a plan together that can work with the National Park Service, that can work with SHPO, not asking their permission, but saying, this is what we're gonna do, this is why we believe that we have to do it in order to save the most historic buildings up there. We're gonna have to lose some of the ones that aren't as historic. And I know there's people out there, I know there's pure preservationists who say you take 1 brick of that entire thing down, and you've lost. I understand the fact that it was designed in a sense that the architecture, the layout, the entire thing, the flow, the light, the air, all that is part of it. I get that, I really do. But if we want to save, in my opinion, if we want to save the 3 towers, the sight line, the skyline of our city, then we're going to have to come up with a plan that takes in that's achievable. Because I also think that if we put together a plan that we can't get funding for, then we're going to put a fence around the whole building, watch it fall on top of itself.
Like
If
the-
that's preservation, count me out, because I'm not gonna watch that building fall down, because we're not gonna come together to the table and make a plan that works.
I just want to, if that's true what happens, we'll just turn up like the other 14 Kirkbride buildings that are around the United States that they're just sitting there. I just looked on it now, I see how many there was 14 of them. Traverse City and the one in Arizona, the only one's being used, besides, and ours is not being used yet, so. I don't want to be that picture on that, sitting there for how many years empty and just sits there because of what we're going through right now. I think we should, well, I know we can. We voted on the plan A and B. I mean, that was if the developer fell through, B was down, going for a plan. Is that not right? No?
No, we never, Your Honor, members, we never did take an official action on that. That
That's
was a
okay.
conversation that we did hold about having to develop Plan B if we were to get there, but there was no official action
To
taken.
move ahead with going ahead with the
You know,
legislators.
I'll just say, let's, in a meeting that I had with SHPO, and I said that Plan B, we have talked about it publicly, we've talked about demolition. And their response was, they said, you know what, can we change the dialogue? Instead of talking about demolition, let's talk about deconstruction of that property, okay? If you look, West Detached was built detached. Rod brought this up last November. We may need to detach those buildings in order for us to move forward, actually find a developer to work on it. Any snapshot of that campus over the last 100 years is simply a picture in time. There's barns, there's farms, there's all kinds of stuff that has come and gone. Right now, it's where it is, and I get it. Again, I get the main Kirkbride horseshoe is the most historic. But I believe firmly, if we come up with a plan that justifies why we're going to save, and I believe we need to save it. Believe we need to start with east, west, and the tower, and see how much we can go from there. That's what I personally believe. And I know every member of the council probably has slightly different ideas and opinions on that. But again, we've got to have a plan that actually gets funded. And if we have a path forward that could possibly still save those historic tax credits for the other red brick buildings and for the actual tower in the east and west, why would we not consider that path? No one asked SHPO. I'm glad I kind of stumbled into that one. Like my grandpa said, even a blind sow finds an acorn once in a while. No one actually asked SHPO. And I asked them directly, and they told me it's not impossible.
Just have a quick comment if I could.
Jeff?
Yeah, just in reference to the tax credits, these other states didn't offer a 20% state tax credit like Minnesota does, so we have a huge advantage going in with 40% tax credits versus going somewhere else where you get just the federal 20%. So that's a significant difference.
So I guess, yes, Brent?
My concern is, I mean, I'm willing to go, continue on the path that we're going and even consider what you're doing. But even if we come down to the point where we're going to deconstruct or whether we're going to demo, we can't do anything until we got funding from the state to do it, because we can't put that burden on the people of this town.
100% agree.
So even if it comes down to the point where we decide we're going to deconstruct or we're going to demo, and we make that decision and we're going to do it, then pretty much you're just going to have to mothball the thing until you get the money from the state so they finally take their responsibility for this. In the meanwhile, if we get another contractor who comes in, I'm more willing to listen because it's sitting there. It's not costing us anything. I'd much rather see it redeveloped. But the point is if it comes to that other option, I do believe that we can't do anything until we have the money to do it. And that doesn't mean Fergus money, that means state money.
I think we can all agree on that. We have to have a plan that we present to the state legislature that is funded in order for us to move forward on anything like that. That's what we can all agree on.
Absolutely.
Say, Ben, on your timeline on the deconstruction word, how soon are we gonna have numbers on possible deconstruction of certain buildings to go to the state for funding, for one? And two, to the question I asked by Mr. Thompson, I think that, in my opinion, the council needs to recognize, even though the buildings potentially weren't sold on certain terms, I think it's in front of us now to know that to make a lot of the reconstruction or remodel happen up there, developers used the mechanisms that they thought were available to make their plan work. And I don't think, in my opinion, I don't want to be sending a message to current developers, future developers on any property in Fergus Falls that the council is going to make decisions that would potentially take money out of their pocket based upon work they're going to or have done in our city. I think that's, I don't think that's a good message. I know we've talked about a friendly business and development in this community. I want to make sure that developers know that that's, at least in my opinion, I want to make sure, we honor that. And, I would like to know the answer of possible deconstruction if tax credits had already used or thought they could be used, or future tax credits. I want to make sure that we know that answer before we do make a decision, because to me that's, we want to know if we're taking money out of somebody's pocket if they've already spent money in this community to develop.
Can I just respond to that as far as the timeline of this? The way whatever plan we come up with, the way I see it happening is the council, we decide, okay, what direction are we taking? And what that plan is, as we formulate that, I think there's going to be a lot of different options. But I think if we can agree that we want to do everything we can to try to maintain that registry with a manageable plan, to have those two, and recognize that they're not mutually exclusive until somebody tells us that they are, and they haven't told us that yet, that we work with a historical architectural consulting firm, like I mentioned, just like you get on a registry, you put a plan together, whatever our plan is, and we work with that firm to create that plan, and then we bring that to the Park Service. And I'm going to assume, I don't know, but I'm going to assume that as we go through that process, and that's what in my opinion, that's what the state gave us the money for, is to explore all options of what we can do with that building. So that we do have funding for that, by the way. And I just let me real quick just wrap up, and I'd say that as we go through that process, there's going to be, if you had the east-west and the tower and you went out this far, this is what it would look like, this is what it would cost, this is what it would mean. And there's going to be, it's not like all or nothing. We're going to have a different layout of views of what it could look like, what it could cost, what it would mean. And then I think that as we're working through that, we're showing our due diligence or good faith effort to do everything we can to maintain the registry. And this summer, when the bonding bills, or the bonding committees from the House and the Senate, and I think Andrew will touch on that later, but when they're touring, we'll be working down a path so that when it comes time next session, we'll be there. We'll have already been on their radar. We'll be working through this. We'll have completed that plan, we'll have an answer, I'm assuming, and then we can ask for the money. Sorry, that's maybe a long answer to your short timeline question.
Yeah.
Ben, Mr. Mayor, do we have some numbers from the past studies there that talk about what are some of the costs for tearing down or removing some of those, call them the breezeways? I think we have some of those numbers. We need to probably explore that a little bit and see what we have left over. We know what those numbers are, to know the numbers we have to go ahead with doing something and showing some progress.
You talking about the 1.99?
Correct.
Yeah, I think that kind of maybe a separate conversation, if you will, but I mean, I think if we get those funds, we find out next week that they pass the bill, we go ahead with some of the stuff that, in the tunnels, the powerhouse, some of that stuff in the back that we know, that let's get it done, let's show progress. I think you're right. We just get some of that stuff done, that we've already talked, that everyone's on agreement with. You know, Shippo's on board, we're all on board, let's go ahead and get that stuff done.
Part of the willingness to
Sure.
go ahead with somewhat of a plan.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I personally liked your letter. I guess I can't, in my mind, I can't see somebody coming in and developing the whole campus. And I understand we have people over here that want to save everything, and we have people over here that want to tear the whole thing down. We have to come to a compromise somewhere in the middle. And I just can't see that somebody's going to walk in here with 60 to 80 million or whatever it costs to redevelop that whole thing and make it work. I mean, Fergus is not a destination for a lot of people. And I don't think that having that would make us a destination. It would help bring some people in, yes, but it's not going to be lots and lots of people. I don't see that. So I think we have to compromise somewhere along the line, and some of it we're going to have to deconstruct. Now, if somebody comes in and wants to develop the whole thing, I'm absolutely for it. But in my mind, I've been around here for quite a while, and we haven't, those that we have had in here to do that, except for you, have just been in looking to see what money we can give them. They haven't really had a great plan as to what they're going to do with that campus. And we need a plan to where we can redevelop the part of the RTC that we can, and what we can't, we will have to deconstruct. That's the way I feel about it.
I agree with you, Jim, and I also would just add that I think it could be beautiful up there. I think the possibilities are, I mean, if you have, like, if you just look at the picture of West Detached when it was originally built, that building is absolutely beautiful. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that we will develop that building if we can get it back, stabilized to that condition.
I guess one other thing that I would like to add is for those people that want to keep the whole campus, if Fergus Falls hadn't jumped in there, that would be all green grass right now because the state would have torn the whole thing down by now. So we have been working on it. We haven't been sitting on our hands. But it's just too big a project for somebody to come in and do, I feel.
Justin?
Your Honor, and I don't know, with the current agreement or the letter of intent we have from Mr. Christopherson, I mean, and without going through specifics, I mean, he had an idea for quite a bit of the complex, but if I'm recalling right, it wasn't east or west that he wanted, correct? So I think the biggest question for me is in terms of the redevelopment of all of it or deconstruction of partial is, if we do get an answer on your question or all of our questions about the historic tax credits and what it does for a developer who would want to develop most of it but not east-west or those types of things, what does that do? Because if they would allow us to work within the constraints of keeping east and west as historic and the tower is historic, but then the centralized portion not, that's probably going to be our best answer to try and redevelop more than what we potentially currently could do. So I mean, that's an answer that needs to be, or that's a question that needs to be answered sooner than later for us to really develop a plan, I think, because our plan is going to be, I think, contingent on some of those answers.
I think that, well, I don't, until they see a plan, they're not gonna give us an answer. I mean, I think they can say if you chop off, if we just go chop off west detached next week, I think they probably will tell us that then you're jeopardizing the National Register. I'm not speaking for the National Park Service or SHPO. I think what I heard from them is, if you have justification, if you believe that this is what needs to happen, you need to put a plan that documents why, what is it going to look like, which of the historical components are you going to keep, how much does it cost, and answer those questions. So I guess what I'm saying is, again, I'll go back and say, we've talked about Plan A and Plan B, but I think we have to have Plan 1. That's a campus plan. That's a plan that doesn't work around a developer. It says, this is what we can do as a community, and developers, you're going to have to fit within that plan. So that's what I'm advocating for. That's what I believe we need to do as a council. But of course, the decision's up to you.
But just to follow up on that, the numbers we got last year, West Detached was the most dilapidated building of all of them, and nobody on the council wanted to stick any money into that one building because of that fact. If that is the most historic, because that's the first building on that site, to me, if we're spending money, that would be the last building to work on and try and use the money that we have for the rest of the site. Because nobody on the council wanted to, or I shouldn't say nobody, but it didn't pass to spend any money on that building. But if that building is the most dilapidated and it's going to cost the most to repair, how far is the rest of the money going to go on the rest of the site?
Well, we don't know what the money is. I would say that part of the reason is because there's 600,000 square feet that's attached up there. If you could detach west, in my opinion, and stabilize it to where, not so it's perfect, but it's stabilized, ready for a develop. It's gonna be there while a developer is identified. We'll be able to get that building done. And I think in order to save West Detached, which is, I think, again, I'm not gonna speak for anybody, but at our meeting, Chris Schulke said, and I'm not suggesting that he's supporting what I'm saying, but I will say what he said at the meeting was that campus can sustain a number of nicks and cuts, but there has to be a line drawn. And West Detached is the first building up there. It's the most historic. That's the line that's drawn. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I realized that we need to do something drastic if we're going to save. Because you're right, the council voted against spending $8,000 to fix a hole in the roof up there. So, and I told that to SHPO. I mean, the council is not ready to just put any of this taxpayer money from the city of Fergus Falls into this building. But again, to come up with that plan, I think it needs to be a bold one that says, you know what, we could develop West Detached if it didn't have 300,000 square feet of hallway attached to it. Right.
Is it okay to float some ideas? Your article is kind of like, we need a plan. So I was thinking about what would the steps, that would be reasonable based on what I know about the project so far. Could I just list those maybe and get some feedback?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in my understanding, first of all, that the building doesn't remain in the same state forever. That is, we have a moisture problem. And I've said quite often, and I still stand by that our biggest enemy is from within in the building. The moisture, the tunnels were created to carry heat and to dry the building. They were heating tunnels. I was in there when I was a Boy Scout back in the 60s, running around in there. But, when they were shut down and then the sump pumps were taken out and the moisture built up, they became conduits of moisture and mold. And we've had state people testifying that that's a problem. So I believe that we can't just talk about this in terms of there's no timeline, like we can just decide, but we must stop the moisture buildup. We must go after the ventilation in all of the buildings there that we deem reasonably worth saving, you know, which I think means that we must we either demo all those tunnels or we do something very drastic to change the moisture flow in there. This is my opinion. It's not, I'm trying to go by what we've heard from, you know, Stantec and others, okay? So that's the first thing, I think. Deal with the moisture. I believe that we should have open ticketed tours of the main, you know, tower, because people want to come, they still want to come and see it. But I think we should change the arrangement. I think that should be under Amy Baldwin and the EIC, and that should be cost per tour. There should be specifics, clearly what we're doing, but we should get that building ready to tour if we're going to save, because people, that helps us in the long run. And that means getting the tunnels dealt with. If they have to be all demoed, okay, so that's what I'm going to put on the table. And that would include fans, airflow, whatever it takes. And even if SHPO gets upset about, or the state wants to negotiate about this money that might be used, as Kent has reminded us many times, we can't do stuff that improves development, whatever, however you want to say that. You understand what I'm talking about. I don't really care. If we're going to save it, you said don't let the tail wag the dog. We cannot let the tail wag, we can't live in fear anymore. We have to stop the moisture buildup, ventilate it, stop the tunnels contributing, whatever that takes. That's, to me, number one, okay? Okay. Number two, I think that we must try to divide the Kirkbride into 4 areas of developmental discussions. That is, we have to be allowed to talk about what Mr. Schlossman has as a separate area, what the tower is as a separate area, what east is detached is, and what west detached. 4 different areas, and I don't mean that we just write them off. I mean that we go to the state and say, these are different kinds of buildings. They have different potentialities. Let us negotiate with you on a area by area contextual basis, instead of trying to negotiate the whole thing, which we've learned is impossible. Developers can't handle it. Our recent one, you know, was tried again and just frustrated by this stuff. And that would include tax credits, how we allot them. It would include everything about those areas, that they'd be open for discussion. And I believe there's a legislative will right now, and the options we have, that we could get a hearing to get those divided, as kind of your letter alludes to, Ben, too, you know, into parts that we can negotiate to talk about what would it mean if we did this, instead of trying to talk about the whole thing at once. You know, it's just overwhelmingly impossible. You do one brick, everything is under consideration. No, that's not going to work, okay? So secondly is divided into 4 main areas. Main tower entrance and buildings deemed developable, okay? West detached, east detached, and then previously committed areas sold and under other development, okay? That's number 2. Number 3, I believe we should pursue the demo of non-contributory buildings if we get the funding. Nothing should be put on the people of Fergus Falls, but non-contributory buildings, and that would include old and new power plant buildings, the wood shop, laundry, and I believe the administrative office building, no matter how people see that as functional, that 1960s building, if we're preserving this for a beautiful building, that's a wart on the front of the tower area. If you look at that thing, it's just a big wart. And I'm sorry, I don't deny the fact that it's functional, that offices could go there, that some developer might see dollar signs. It would ruin the front of that building if you really want to preserve a historic building. Otherwise, take it off the registry and, you know, make whatever you want out of it. That's my opinion. So start the demo as soon as we know we have the funding for those buildings. And then there's a final thing we haven't done, and I believe it relates to community. I appreciated letters from Michelle Anderson and others that I believe we need people gathered that actually have the dollars and the organizational commitment in this community, and that would include Jerry Ness with the school, other people like that, includes Chris Schulke. Those are the people we need at the table to sit down with us, the people who have the money and the organizational will and members to possibly occupy parts of those areas once we get them divided and say, okay, Can someone take this? I'm convinced, Ben, that with what you said, and if we start with reasonable goals and go to the legislature with this kind of a plan, that we can get funding. And it may mean some deconstruction of some things. I'm not saying that, but we're trying our best to develop this reasonably then. So those are the 4 things that I wanted to bring to this meeting. And I hope that you're willing to discuss them. I'm not trying to say it's the last word, but I just wanted to say in closing that the Kirkbride was part of a national movement that was state-funded, state-sized solution. And I had relatives up there who died up there. I have a lot of history, you know, with that building, including being up there and visiting it when I was younger, and having someone work there. But it remains for the community and the state to realize and mitigate this inordinate burden that the Kirkbride represents as a whole to us. We must break it down. And that if we don't do that, we can wait 100 years and nothing will happen. I believe the council has to take a position, strong position, and it should seek to find other solutions like the PTSD Center and other things, but we must start with our community. We must get everyone here at the table who has money and organizational power, and then we've got to do those steps, however, what order we want. And that is that's as far as we can go right now. We can't see the future, no crystal balls, you know. And unless someone wins the lottery, one of the Kirkbride people, and is going to, you know, buy the whole thing and take care of it, that's not likely to happen. So those were my suggestions.
I don't disagree at all with your breaking it into sections. I think that's the approach that we have to do. In my opinion, and I think everyone on the council will get a chance to put their ideas in there. I would just add that after that meeting with SHPO, it became clear to me that the path forward in order to try to maintain the 40% tax credits, because without the 20% from the federal level, you don't have the 20% from the state. I mean, it's not even on the table. So I think that in my opinion, we owe it to go down that path of whatever that plan is. Like you say, get the people, get the council to come up, to work through that process, but to engage a historical architectural consulting firm to document that, so that we are going after both the 20% federal and the 20% state historical tax credits. Does that make sense? Thanks, Rod. Any other thoughts? Anything from staff? Have anything?
Just I wanted to ask Amy and Andrew from the economic side and develop as you see it. If we were to do that, would our chances of securing funding be clearer as we look for placeholder if we were to take certain actions and then say this is really what we want to do, you know, getting negotiation of those things? Would it make it easier for us to determine funding in future, do you think? Do you see that reasoning, or do you feel that's not, you know, because if it's not reasonable, that we can't go that way to try to divide it up and look at specifics. I mean, either one, I think Amy, you know, you've been involved with development and obviously have some opinions about this. I think I'd like to hear more, and maybe you don't want to say anything now because it just raised the question.
Do you want to talk about the legislative process first, or?
Yeah, I can, Your Honor, members of the council. There's so much uncertainty surrounding any legislative action that it's hard to give a good, so I would love to speak louder. I see you. Yeah, I got it. Dealing with legislative action, it's always filled with uncertainties, and it's hard to sit up here and give you a solid answer, but from my expertise and experience working with several legislatures, I think that anytime you have people that aren't lobbying against you, you have a better chance of being successful. And I say that because of what the mayor stated earlier. If what we're working on doesn't fall in line or doesn't isn't acceptable to SHPO, we're going to have somebody that's got a strong presence at the Capitol that's actively lobbying against us. So if this is a conversation that we're going to have with SHPO and they agreed that, you know, we can look at it in different sections, which I don't believe that they have up till now, then yes, we're going to have some difficulties if they're not on board or at the table with that discussion. I was in St. Paul last Thursday and just happened to run into the lobbyist for SHPO. And I had just brief conversations with him about the past and the history of the building and some of the conversations now and where we're at with the development group. And they stated to me that they would be glad to review and comment on any legislation that we're possibly considering and be glad to be upfront with us on what their position would be and how they would interpret that. So I think that's an opportunity to engage them over the summer while we're working through these placeholder bills to figure out what the amendments need to be when session comes in next year. So I don't have a good answer for you just because of all the legislative uncertainty. I don't even know if they're going to pass a budget bill by the next, you know, by the end of this session. So we could have a government shutdown by summertime. But I think getting the right people in the conversation would certainly bode well for legislative action.
And just you did mention that lobbyist also mentioned, separate from my conversation, said that working with a historical architectural consulting firm is how you get something either on the registry or amended once it's on there. Is that, I didn't misunderstand that from SHPO.
Yeah, that's correct, because at the end of the day, it's the National Park Service, Department of Interior's decision as to whether or not something is capable or qualified for being on the National Registry. So working with presenting that case to SHPO is kind of the conduit to the National Park Service, getting them on board and presenting that as to why we should remain on the National Registry would go through that process that you mentioned, using that historical architect who would know the ins and outs of what would qualify under the guidelines of the National Park Service. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to.
And I can just piggyback on that. So just from the value and the importance of trying to maintain those tax credits, if we are looking at whatever, size of development that the campus remains, but in doing our best to ensure that National Registry is not jeopardized or is modified to keep the tax credits available, I think is just really critical from a development perspective. And then if this scenario of having multiple standalone buildings also eases the process of doing that and utilizing the tax credits, and just makes it more of a developable type of property. So, my 2 cents on that.
Right. And I think, I appreciate that. My sense is that, and maybe this is just a belief, everything is negotiable if you are going at it reasonably. And we mustn't ever lose sight of that. The other thing is we should believe in ourselves. We should believe that we can go down and talk to people in St. Paul. We shouldn't see anyone as a boogeyman that's too not approachable. And I believe in my whole life, my experience has borne that out. It's better to try and go talk to someone, to encounter whatever your fears are and lay it out. Even if you get rejected, at least you got an answer. But we mustn't sit here and dawdle and wait and let humidity ruin those buildings anymore. We have to try. If we can't do it and the state says no, and SHPO says no, you can't break it up and talk about, then we've tried.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, we are guilty. But if we try, and
I agree with you 100%, Rod. If we put together a plan that says and take that to the National Park Service, and says this is what we believe that we can do as a community, and with a good faith effort, we have done everything we can. And at that point, if they say no, then we have a decision to make.
And
I think there is a path forward that brings 95% of the people in this community together to at least compromise, bring them to the table.
But I want to say I will not spend Fergus Falls taxpayer money. We are not the West Central Historic Preservation Society. We are a city, and we have lots to do here. And so I will not spend that. I would rather rope it off and wait and say to the state, look, if you refuse us and we can't divide it and we can't get a developer, This was a state-sized building from a national movement, then you need to find another national movement like PTSD and give us a state-sized solution and go to our congressman in Washington, because honestly, I don't think anyone should be pointing any fingers when we're done at us or at anyone else. We should try to do it as best we can. That's all we're asked to do. And that's where I'm at. We need to get on with it, and we need to stop the moisture deterioration in that building, open it for tours so that we get fresh air in there and people seeing it again, but make sure it's clear how we do that. So I just want us to go forward one step at a time. You know, that's how you make a 1,000-mile journey. Just get going. So.
I agree with you on the on the funding. We're not going to use local taxpayer dollars. Although we do have money, if the council decides that we're going to try to work with put together our plan, but that it works with SHPO, not ask SHPO for permission, but it says this is what we are going to do, and takes into consideration the historic integrity of the building, and works with the National Park Service to see if we can maintain those historic tax credits. We do have, I believe that falls within the funding that we have from the state. I believe that the city council could give direction to staff to engage those consultants, to get quotes, to see how much is this gonna cost, what's this process, what's the timeline, and move forward with that without putting Fergus Falls taxpayer dollars at risk, because we do have funding from the state that they've given us to work on that property.
So let's just take the first one I suggested, because I haven't heard any, nays or yays from my fellow council members here. But if we were to go to try to remedy the moisture as our first, and go after the closing off or demo of the tunnels, to do that, to make sure we have airflow, and to try to get the tours going again in that central area. Do my fellow council members agree with that or not?
Ben, I'll talk to Rod. He wants to talk, I'll talk to him. Yeah, I agree with you 100%, but getting the tunnels done, you and I have talked about this before, and the only way to get it done, though, is to get that legislator to pass that bill. And if they don't pass that bill, we're dead in the water completely. We don't have, what do we got, $300,000 left?
Yeah, we've got 300 plus, but of that money, there are certain things that are contingencies against that, so that brings that balance down. So
Right.
we need the 1.9 that's in the current legislative bill to even look at tunnels.
So
We're gonna get that 1.9, we're gonna get those tunnels done.
That'd be good, because next meeting we'll talk about if they do it, and get that done. And I agree with, move on, we have to do something. I think we've answered our question about what we're gonna do with SHPO. I mean, SHPO won't give us a direct answer for Christopherson, or we can't give him a direct answer, so he's opened himself wide open to, if he did something wrong, he'll be in trouble, get sued or whatever. So the next developer's gonna come along, and he's gonna read this and he's say, well, why should I do that? I mean, that's what's gonna happen to me too, unless he follows their exact rules, which we know is gonna be very expensive. And so I'm a little worried. Nobody's called SHPO's bluff. I mean, they keep saying they're gonna do this to us, but nobody's called their bluff and just moved ahead and let's just go do what we wanna do, and I don't care what you say, because everybody got their money. You got your money after you did your project, and I proved it. So it can be done, but if we wait and see, they gotta come prove it.
I just say, Scott, I understand what you're saying, and I did ask SHPO directly, and they gave me a direct answer that it's not impossible what we're talking about doing. But I would reiterate what Andrew said. If we think we're gonna have a plan to just demo a bunch of it and go down and actually get that money, it's important that we actually get the money to accomplish whatever plan we're gonna do up there. And that's why I think the compromise is to work with a historical architectural firm that specializes in this stuff and say, this is what we wanna do as a city. I've said that.
And I'll argue, my phone's gonna ring off the wall tomorrow after this meeting. I'll guarantee it, I'll get phone calls. You guys kicked it down the road again, you're just
We
trying.
don't have to kick it down the
But
road.
we're just trying to you don't wanna address the head-on issue. They don't, and that's exactly what we're gonna mess around for another 6 months on this, at least.
we have got to go to the state legislature next session, which doesn't start until January. We've got to have a plan, and not only that we can put a plan together in 5 minutes, but we need to put a plan together that's actually gonna be successful, to get money.
We're gonna argue about how the plan's gonna be, all total demolition, half demolition, we're gonna argue about that for the next 6 months, I guarantee it. Because we've done it for 5 years or 6 years, we just kept on going down the road. 12 years.
I think the council can take an action to say if they're willing to consider a plan of deconstruction that recognizes the most historic components up there. And to me, like I said, to me, I start with east, west, and the tower. And work with the consultant that tells us what that looks like, what it costs.
I want to respond.
Justify it.
I guess I feel that we are doing something then, Scott, if we were to take the next step, which is divide it into 4 areas, go to the legislature, go to SHPO, go to and say, look, this is what we're going to do. We need to deal with each of those areas as a unique situation to a certain extent. Different kinds of needs, different kinds of possible development. And if we have those areas, then I believe that we aren't kicking the can down the road at all, because we will never make a decision in this body here that will do everything at once. You know, like, we're going to save the tower and take everything else out, or we're going to save we have to take each thing in its steps. And if you don't deal with the moisture, you won't have anything to save. If you don't divide it up, you're going to be stuck again and again against the size of this massive project. So instead of developing 125 or 150,000 square feet, you're immediately always talking about developing 600,000 square feet. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And it's no one's fault on the council we haven't been able to do it, because you can't do that. You know, and so I'm just saying we need to take steps, even if we don't know what the legislature is going to do. Quit playing that card. Plan to do this. If they don't do it, then change your plan. But be ready, and let's go and ask for this stuff, and let's take it. You said you wanted to go forward, you want a plan. I think I'm just challenging all of us. Come up with another plan. If you don't like those steps, you come up with a plan and present it. Anyone, I don't care who it is, but let's start chewing this thing up one bite at a time. Let's do it what we have to do.
Rod, I don't disagree with you, and I think that from my perspective, the tunnels, the moisture, the $1.9 million, let's take action. Like, we're going to find out at the next meeting whether we get that money, but I think we're all in agreement that we're going to go after the powerhouse, we're going to go after the tunnels, we're going to go after those non-contributory buildings, okay? I think we can all agree on that. As far as your second thing about dividing it up, I agree with you on that, Rod. I think the way we go about it is, I asked SHPO that exact question, and the response that I got, so I asked them head on. I didn't beg their permission for anything. I said, the council is talking about a plan that does not involve the entire footprint of that main building. And their response was, they said it's not impossible. It might be a challenge, and I said, well, that's a challenge worth taking. And they said the way to do that is to go through an architectural firm that specializes in that, so that plan can be presented to say those specs. So I agree with you. I think that's the path forward on that part of your idea. And I think we take the action we do and we move forward. And if that's not moving forward for enough people, I don't know. I'm not interested in coming up with a plan that has 0% chance of actually getting funded. That's my thought. And I'm just saying, I think we have a path forward to actually get the money. Or, I'm sorry, Justin was.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on Rod's point, those 4 action items. I mean, we wouldn't be, the moisture's been a problem, and that should be taken care of right away, but we're not probably going to get an answer or have a plan in place from SHPO. One of your points was, if they won't cooperate with us and work with us, then build up a fence and do nothing. Right? Isn't that what you pretty much said?
If it involves taxpayer money, and I think this gets to Scott's point, you know, I'm not saying we have to go after SHPO as an adversary, but we must challenge them with positive ideas that they can deal with. They don't have all the answers laid out. They're responding to things that we do. They're a responsive organization. We need to take the lead, is all I'm saying.
So then, on top of that, though, from the quotes we got last year, the west detached was the most spendy. The tunnels weren't very cheap. The moisture, to really do what you're saying, I mean, we need to know the answers to the bigger question before we can start spending any of that 1.9 if it gets reawarded, I think, to do that. Because if we really are going to just, you know, if they're not gonna work with us, and the answer is from the council that we just put up a fence and don't do nothing, we'd be throwing good money at bat. Right?
I think I hear, you're agreeing that we need to put a plan forward to see if SHPO responds, right?
Correct.
I think that.
But-
we
but-
have to do
I
that.
think that's what.
But we need to do that before we make decisions on where that 1.9 goes, what we spend it on, dehumidification. I mean, I don't disagree with your 4 points and the areas we need to spend on, but we need to find out if they're gonna work with us on that facility.
And I think that what's paralyzed us, I mean, I came in late to this, Jim, and you guys have been here a long time. To me, what's paralyzed us, we come in here, and to Kent's credit, Kent is a lawyer who's trying to protect us. This is how I hear it. If you spend that money on ventilation, you are likely, and then it goes to Bill, disqualifying something we're gonna spend. He's trying to protect our money, so, okay? But, right?
I'll
so-
even add to that. I know what you're saying, but
So, yeah.
you
well,
finish and then
But then I'll just
chime
say,
in.
so what I'm saying is, I'm not pointing and saying you guys aren't, but I'm saying we have to take a stronger position to say, in spite of the legalities, the technicalities we see in that thing, go to our legislators, go to others and say, this is what we have to do to get this building preserved. We have to do these things. And if you don't want to work with us, where do we go? We're just going to rope it off because we don't have another choice. If you're going to stop us, and I'll use this analogy. I have bought a lot of property. Not a lot, some property. I've had some given to me. If I buy a house, and then someone comes to me after I bought the house and I've moved in and they say, okay, Aunt Chippy, or Shippy, let's call Aunt Shippy, lives next door. And she has the right, if you want to landscape, or if you want to put a nail in your building, in your house, or if you want to do anything in your kitchen or tear up the tile, if you want to change anything in that house, you have to go to Aunt Shippy and ask her. But I'm saying, I own the building. I've got a title to it. Oh no, you've got to go to Aunt Shippy, okay? So I'm saying, I want to plan and say, look, either Aunt Shippy, you buy this from me, or else we got to do something because it's going to fall down if we don't. It's going to fall down. And maybe that's not a good analogy, but it means that our hands are tied on one side unless we take a strong position to go ahead and say, we've got to do this. This is what the council says we've got to do. And if you don't, then we go back to our legislators. If they agree with SHPO and the National Park Service agrees, it's their building. We'll just rope it off. They can watch it fall down. We'll film it.
We've done everything we can.
We've done everything we
We've done
can.
everything we can.
So, Bill, sorry, it's long.
Oh, I was just gonna say, some of, you know, what you're talking about, how when Kent and I have chimed in the past, that's been if we've had a developer on the hook, because you can't spend state bonding dollars for a developer, but certainly, we just got done doing some projects, so that's always, I want to make sure people always know that it's if there's a developer on the hook and they benefit from that, versus we do it to fix that, you know, get rid of the moisture, to keep it for a longer period of time. We can do that. I'm sure, Kent, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, but because that's, we're using it for public benefit then, because it's still our asset. And
Sure. I just wanted to add one thing too, about the discussion about with SHPO. And that is, I think, believe it or not, I had an incredibly productive meeting with SHPO. And I tell you, they are very, I hear SHPO and it's always usually talked about as they're trying to stop us, or they're being obstructionists. Sometimes we just have to talk directly to them and explain. You know, I said two things I reiterated to SHPO. I said, first of all, I'm here on behalf of myself as the mayor. The city council will decide how to go forward. I must have said that to him 5 times. And I also said, I understand you have a job to do. I get it. You're into saving buildings. I understand you have a job to do, but you have to understand I have a job to do too, and that's to protect our community and come up with a reasonable plan that we can actually go forward. So I guess what I'm saying is, when you talk to people sometimes, like you said, Rod, when you just open up a dialogue and actually talk to them, you can get a lot more done. And they said, thank you, Fergus Falls. There's communities that if that would have been in a different community, city would have walked away. They recognized for 12 years we've done everything we can to save the building. And now it's time to go forward and get it done. Brian.
Well, the one question I had when Rod was bringing up the whole thing with the moisture, and then we always got to worry about SHPO saying, well, these tunnels are historically prevalent. I mean, if you just seal the darn things off, I mean, are they in our way when they're sitting out there in the ground? I mean, if we seal them off, we have not done anything to them. They're already in disrepair down there. We'd have to tear them out of the ground. Unless we plan on putting something out there with a foundation or something else, they're not bothering anybody.
No collapse.
Can they just be sealed off? I mean, literally sealed off. Go in there, seal off the ends. We did not do anything to them. I would assume the cost to seal them off and just leave them there until you have a problem with them starting to collapse or having additional problems. Can that be done?
Your Honor, Councilmember Thompson, the proposal is to remove the tunnels only where they're not underneath a building.
Okay.
And that's simply because there are areas where they're exposed, and some of the tunnels are structurally compromised, and we have fears that they may collapse at some point.
Okay.
So sealing the ends would not remove the fear of, somebody mowing over the top of it, driving over the top of it, walking over the top of it, and having that structure compromised and collapse with
And
somebody.
that one I understand, but I mean, we got all these other tunnels. I mean, I don't ever hear anybody saying when they're the developer that they want these tunnels. I mean, if there's nothing wrong with them, and we could just seal them off to get rid of the moisture issues, then they're there. Hopefully, they're not going to have any more future problems. If they do, we'll deal with them at a later time. Seal them off.
You, Ben,
Yeah.
have you been in them? Have you been
No.
in- Yeah, you should go in them and you'd change your tune.
Okay.
Well, I think we can figure out the tunnels, right? I mean, I think we've decided that we're, SHPO, they're caving in. We can get, we have, I think the bigger question is how do we move forward on the entire, a plan that takes into consideration what we've discussed here tonight.
Ben?
And I think we have that separate conversation at the next council meeting with 1.9 and have a plan of action of where we're going with that. Separate from the
Right.
the idea that
But-
brought forward.
And the,
I just got one question on, so we get that plan in place, and you went down and spoke with SHPO, but there's like 3 or 4 entities involved. Is there a way to be productive and get everybody in the same room that building affects, from the state and SHPO and the National Parks Service, so we can not talk to one, then we gotta go check with the other, and then we gotta go back to the 4th one and go, can we get a meeting where everybody's in the same room and we can hash out, whether it takes all day or 2 days, hash out the differences and go forward?
I think that, to answer that question, SHPO is a liaison to the National Park Service and the Department of the Interior, which oversees the National Registry. Okay? They told me directly that they would be open to conversations about any of this plan, but it has to be a plan that goes to the National Park Service. That's what, if we want to go down the road of trying to maintain the registry and maintain the tax credits, it's clear that's what we have to do. We've got to put together a plan that then is presented to them. And I don't think we have to ask for their permission on what that plan is. I think that this 8-member body comes up with that plan, but when we document, we justify it, why, which buildings we believe are the most historically significant that we're going to save, what it costs, what it looks like, and all those answers. Go ahead,
Real
Andy.
quickly to that point, SHPOs is not, it wouldn't be productive to have them in the room because they respond to plans that are submitted to them. Like
Okay.
our engineering department, we're gonna respond to something submitted, we're not gonna speculate, we're not gonna give false hopes. So just having a dialogue, we're not gonna get any solid answers unless they have something to digest and actually respond to. But to further answer your question, the best time to get everybody up here is when the legislature does their bonding tours. A lot of times when SHPO would be affected by one of those capital budget requests, they'll also be in attendance at the tour to get the information, to be able to hear how the legislators respond to that. So inviting all those entities at the same time may turn out to be productive and may be a way to get everybody here. The likelihood of just getting everybody to drive up to Fergus Falls on the same day is not great, so we would end up having to probably go to them if you wanted to get that dialogue happening.
And my reference is more like to your point, is when we do have that cohesive plan that we've discussed and we've got something to go forward, get all the interested parties in the same room and let's take care of it.
Yes, Rob.
just a practical example of why I believe we must divide it into 4 sections. We have a boom in our population of school-age children right now. So let's say potentially, the school system was now ready to use the towers as an administrative area and build something behind it if they had the space. Let's just say, what if that happened with the boom in our children? If we don't divide it up, we're left with telling the school system, yes, but you have to deal with east and west detached and everything else in between, etc. So that's why I believe it's crucial to divide this up as one of our first things. A practical reason, example. And the second thing, you know, that as we look at this larger picture of what we're trying to do, we must, I'm not saying challenge SHPO, I'm saying what Andrew said, we must give SHPO something to chew on, and I think we have to say we're going to demo the non-contributory buildings. We're going to take the tunnels out, we're going to fill them in. I don't know why we want to save them necessarily overall. They're like a 20% versus the 80% of other good things. No developers come here saying, can I please develop the tunnels? So let's demo the tunnels, demo the non-contributory buildings, and we'll see what SHPO does in response. We won't know what they do unless we come with a plan to say, we're taking these out. These non-contributory buildings, the one I listed, okay? The laundry, the carpentry, the old power plant, the new power plant, and the front building, that front wart on the nose of the Kirkbride. And just see what, and then we'll see how they respond. We'll know what they do.
But I think, Rod, I
No.
don't disagree with you, but I think if we do that, with that 1.9 million, if we do that at the same time that the city council's acknowledging, we're gonna put together a plan for the horse that works with, not ask for your permission, but works with you. It works through the National Park Service with a historical architect. I think it shows that
No one's
we're.
arguing that.
It shows
I'm
that we're
just
gonna.
saying,
we're
take a
gonna
step.
do that.
Take a
Yeah,
step.
That we're gonna do that. It's gonna show them that we're
No.
going through that process.
We spent a lot on lawyers arguing with finer points of, you know, whatever. Let's take a step.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I like what Andrew talked about. We talked a little bit about this at the legislative committee meeting the other day, and having this group be up here and going through some of that. It's going to help our process coming along for some more awarding of some monies down the road. So
So,
you got to look them in the eye, invite them up, talk to them face to face to get things done.
So
yeah, go ahead.
on that note, later this evening at the council meeting, before you will be a couple placeholder bills for bonding requests for next year. And we're leaving the amount of the request blank at this point in time, and over the next 3-4 months, we would develop what that plan is and develop some funding requests based on that. And the language is real broad, but we submit these bills at the end of the session knowing that they're placeholder bills that will be amended next session. But the importance of doing it now at the end of this session is that allows us to get on these bonding tours, like I mentioned, and have the Senate Capital Investment Committee and the House Capital Investment Committee come up here this summer and be on the ground with us, looking at the property, and so we can explain what our goal is, what that plan is, and actually show them. So that's the importance of getting the placeholder bills. The plan is to introduce them, if the council gives us the blessing, the last day of the session, a week from today, and they'll be one of the first bills in the hopper next year. So very important timing, and that's the rationale behind it.
All right, so we'll wrap up this meeting. We have on the council agenda a recap of this. The next steps forward, I don't know, are we ready to take a step forward here? I guess we'll decide that at a-